Hi everyone, thanks for joining me in casting a queer eye on the Moloney Guy. Can I start by acknowledging that I am presenting this paper on the land of the Gadigal, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We might get interrupted every now and then by the flight path, but we'll continue on. So, when I first read Oh for a French Wife, the 1952 book written by Ted Moloney and Lloyd Ring Deke Coleman, my gaydar, that unspoken set of signals gay men often have when in the presence of another gay man, pinged. The book is something of a curiosity for its time. Coleman's 7 entries are, in his words, on the chemistry and philosophy of cookery. Moloney's entries are recipes and take up the bulk of the book. It's these latter that set off my gaydar. Why that happened is the subject of this paper. I think what Moloney created in this book and in the half-dozen other cookbooks he would go on to write over the next 20-odd years are gay male cultural objects. Now, from the outset, I have to declare that I have no direct proof that Moloney was homosexual. Try as I might, I can find virtually no biographical information on him. The Australian Dictionary of Biography has an entry on Coleman, but not Moloney. Inquiries via 2 Facebook sites, Lost Gay Sydney and the Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives, turned up nothing. The one item I did find, however, registered high on my gaydar again. This is Moloney's obituary notice in the Sydney Morning Herald of April 1982. To a gay man like me, an obit like this speaks through its absences. There's no mention of a wife and children, either deceased or still living. It's the kind of obit whose coding, albeit unconscious, could be read by other homosexuals, like me, but not by the general public. Margaret Fulton, who worked with Moloney at the advertising company J. Walter Thompson in the mid-1950s, writes in her autobiography of visiting Moloney on a number of occasions of cocktails at his little penthouse, actually a charming converted attic in a large house in the eastern suburbs. No mention of family then, nor later when she visits him at his property Burradoo in the Highlands southwest of Sydney. Moloney and his house were featured in a photo essay in Women's Day in 1967. There are no pictures or references to a wife or children in that article. The article does, though, again unconsciously, describe Moloney and the house in ways that set that gaydar urgently pinging. I quote, "The house is a treasury of beautiful furniture and art pieces collected over the years by its much-traveled owner. His own distinctive personality and good taste are in evidence everywhere. A huge gilt-framed early Edwardian mirror over the fireplace adds to the effect of spaciousness. Exquisite Japanese prints decorate the walls, and on either side of an old Dutch colonial mirror is a delicate French desk of the Third Empire period. Perhaps the most unusual room in the house is the dining room. The floor is subtle blue Florentine tiles with the center design in gold." Now, what's being described here, I contend, is the home of a particular kind of homosexual man of the 50s and 60s. One with enough money and no family ties who can travel extensively and furnish his house with objects that express a gay male sensibility, a house that is also a gay male cultural object. This is a provocative statement, as is my contention that Moloney's books are also gay male cultural objects. To make my argument, I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to identify some key elements of gay male culture as described by gay theorist of sexuality David Halperin in his 2012 book, How to Be Gay. I use Halperin's book because it resonates with me, a gay man who consciously engages in the creation of instances and objects of gay male culture, this paper being one. Then I want to read Moloney's books through this lens. To do this, I'm going to imagine a gay male Moloney in Sydney in the 50s and 60s, and how his books became a safe place in which to perform gay maleness. Here I will draw on material from gay academic Gary Wotherspoon's 2016 book, Gay Sydney, A History, and on the culture of advertising companies of the time as depicted in the television drama Mad Men, in particular the character of Salvatore Romano, a closeted gay man. I'll also draw here on Australian academic Sean Supski's 2007 work, It Was Another Skin, The Kitchen in 1950s Western Australia. The key elements of Halperin's thesis for the purposes of this paper are the following. Gay male culture generates and elaborates a distinctive way of feeling and a unique way of relating to the world through the practice of reappropriating bits of mainstream culture and remaking them into the vehicles of gay or queer meaning. Gay male culture uses a female subject position and a feminine identification to contest the context of the normal coding of cultural objects and activities, while also taking up a female subject position in order to make possible a sexualizing, in fact a homosexualizing, of cultural activities such as sports and opera that are normally coded as heterosexual. From a gay male perspective, everything in the world is also a performance. There's no relation of externality for gay male culture between being and playing a role, between actor and act. They may be distinct, but they are not separate. Rather, they constitute each other. Playing a role is the mode of existing in the social world. And finally, from Halperin, gay male culture locates meaning or content in form itself, finding value in any object that exhibits perfect conformity to a specific aesthetic order, to a specific style. Let me turn now to imagine the world of Ted Moloney, a male homosexual in Sydney in the 50s and 60s. He works as a copywriter in the creative section of a multinational advertising company. It's a relentlessly heterosexual workplace. The men, both married and single, take every opportunity to openly and volubly sexually appraise the women in the office, the secretaries and the models. The men boast of their office affairs. They socialize after work at bars where women are again sexual objects to be seduced and to become the butt of bragging and jokes in the office the next day. Moloney has to join in the heteronormative behavior. He has heard effeminate men denigrated as poofters and pansies by his fellow workers. He has to be careful what he says. He once nearly outed himself disparaging the taste in aprons and upholstery on a television show. He did daringly 14 years ago create a character called Chesty Bond to sell men's underwear. He and the illustrator gave Chesty a physique right out of the fitness magazines that circulated among homosexuals like him at the time. They got away with it by saying that they were capitalizing on the popularity of the new Superman comics that had come from the US. His options for being a homosexual outside of work are limited. He can opt out of after-work drinks with his colleagues and dine at a handful of restaurants where gay men are tolerated, the Shalimar, or the Latin Cafe, whose proprietor, Madame Pura, calls them the people I adore, darlings. He can find sexual partners in the Sportsman's Bar in the Australia Hotel. Looking for sex in the public toilets is too risky. Police often entrap homosexuals there, and employers are quick to dismiss anyone whose arrest appears in the press. Homosexual activity is a crime punishable by a prison term of 14 years. But he does have a circle of homosexual friends who meet for dinners and Saturday afternoon salons at each other's houses. And it's here he finds a safe place to perform gayness and create gay male culture. For women in the 50s and 60s, writes Sean Supski, the importance of preparing, cooking, and eating food not only satisfies a physical need, but expresses an emotional relationship which is also perhaps sexual. The women are intimately connected to their families through the preparation of food and cooking. And the emotion it inspires is a sensual experience as they cook and watch their families eat. Moloney has no family, but he can find a sensual experience and emotional connection through identification with the feminine role of hostess. Not only with his circle of queer friends, but more importantly, with heterosexual men he works with and undoubtedly at times falls in love with. He can ask them to dinner and get pleasure out of watching them eat and compliment his cooking. He can, in Halperin's terms, reappropriate this bit of mainstream culture and invest it with gay meaning safely. As the perfect hostess, he stands outside of the group of guests, keeping an eye on how the dinner, the alfresco afternoon do, is going, ready to serve the next round of canapes or refresh a drink. Moloney knows that he, like his female counterparts, are, in Halperin's words, playing the role of a hostess as a mode of existing in the social world. And the formal dinner is the stage on which it is played for high stakes, socially for the hostess and professionally for their husbands. It begins before the guests arrive. Rehearsal, 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 he writes in French Wife. It's the secret of success with any recipe and with any dinner worthy of the name. The kitchen he builds in his house has an island bench, an innovation which allows him to prepare the penultimate touches of the meal facing the louvers that open from the kitchen into the sitting room. It's a view that draws the audience, his guests, into the otherwise private world of backstage. The performance is completed at the table. This might be for something simple like potatoes Anna, which look like an upside-down cake, crisp and glistening when they go to the table to be served. We'd never dream of cutting into them in the kitchen where there'd be no applause. Or it might be two masterpieces that are going to be brought out as the climax of our party and not served until they've been seen by all. These masterpieces are those two wonderful open-faced French tarts known as quiche Lorraine and onion tart. The double entendre of French tarts is intended, a shared thrill of illicit sexuality. Somewhere along the way, Moloney has arrived at a meal aesthetic of balance. This is not balance in the sense of nutritional values. It's something he never formally defines, but you get some sense of it in his asides when he's describing a meal. One vegetable, in addition to potatoes, is all you should ever serve if you are going to do justice to that vegetable. It's the antithesis of the kinds of dinners being promoted in the cookery pages of the magazines like the Women's Weekly. It's an aesthetic that informs even the simplest of cocktails. Ted, Margaret Fulton wrote, would never serve gin on the rocks as a martini. 4-to-1 was his accepted ratio. 3-to-1 is okay for those who like vermouth. Ted would offer a tiny green olive with the drink, but preferred a twist of lemon peel. The peel would never be dropped into the drink, just squeezed over the precious liquid. With Ted Moloney, the making and offering of a martini was lifted to an art form, Fulton writes. He believed a good martini set the mood for a good meal. Here, Moloney's balance is not only in the contents of the drink, but in the performance of its making and its place in the theatre of the meal. He found the perfect expression of this aesthetics of a meal balance in French cooking. When I dined at home solo, he wrote in his 1973 Good Living cookbook, I invariably composed the meal in advance with what I considered French balance, always a salad after the meat. His teachers in French cuisine were the women whose menus formed the final section of French Wife, titled Perfect Balance in Serving of the Meal. He later wrote, when the urge hit me to learn French cooking, just as a hobby, I thought, I had Yanni Despinay, Louise Coleman, and Paulette Pellier to take me in hand. I hear echoes here of women in Supski's study who learned to cook primarily from their mothers through interplay between observation, imitation, active participation, and instruction. Here is Moloney, the gay man, challenging a heteronormative practice, looking not to French male chefs or cooking schools for instruction, but to women who were perfect hostesses for the guests of their executive and ambassadorial husbands. Moloney identified with another aspect of the experiences of the women in Supski's study. She wrote, women's self-confidence or lack of it seems directly related to their beliefs in their food-making ability. Moloney often acknowledges the trepidation women reading his recipes may feel faced with what look like elaborate, delicate, difficult dishes, but he assures them that they can make them. Your first little miracle, he writes in the 1965 Cooking for Brides, will be profiteroles, light as clouds. This is quite a promise we make you. Profiteroles are cream puffs. Yes, you can. You can make them. Oh yes. Cream puffs of any size. They look desperately difficult. They are not. You can make little ones, medium-sized ones, or puffs the size of cricket balls, light as a feather, which you fill with delicious savory things as a first coast for your much talked about little dinner parties. Of serving crêpes Suzettes, he writes elsewhere, when all the pancakes are folded in, add a magnificent dash of brandy. Count 1, 2, 3. Tilt the pan so that the cooking flame can ignite the brandy and curacao. Whisk the pan to the table and serve the crêpes Suzette still flaming. Let's face it, this needs rehearsal. For a man who cooks, Moloney hilariously recounts an attempt at these that ended in the pan becoming a Vesuvius. An atom cloud of black smoke shot up all around the pan and stretched up to the ceiling. In seconds it spread and started coming back down the walls. The chandelier was like an eclipsed sun through dark glasses. Did I mention that one of the other characteristics of gay male culture Halperin identifies is the capacity to turn tragedy into high melodrama? But as with Chesty Bond, Moloney finds opportunities to drop in references or make comments that appear not to have any sexual meaning, but very much do so for his homosexual male readers. Duchess potatoes, when dropped in hot fat, will soon float light as Esther Williams to the surface. Onions have a lusty peasant breath, which quickly changes so much for the better in the cook pot, always full of promise. At times he throws all caution to the wind. When buying a pumpkin, he writes, insist on your piece being fresh cut from a pumpkin which has just come into the shop. Blue skin shining, no scars of age. Flaccid, seed-drooling lumps of pumpkin are not for these recipes. I want to end this talk, this queering of Moloney, with a lovely example of how, in Halperin's words, as a creator of gay male culture, he locates meaning or content in form itself, finding value in any object that exhibits perfect conformity to a specific aesthetic order, to a specific style. Here's Moloney. The clearest consommé, and ours shall be the clearest of clear, must carry in its own liquid all the flavor with which it is going to entrance the palate. To get so much flavor in an absolutely clear soup takes only time, a generously big bird, and fresh vegetables. After 5 hours of gentle simmering, you will have extracted just about all of the flavor from the fowl and the vegetables. Strain. Reheat the broth, but not past the simmering point. Correct the seasoning, and there's your consommé. It is so clear you can see the gold crest on the bottom of your soup plate, and yet it has a most satisfying flavor. Do we serve bread with this consommé? We do not. Instead, we make small puff pastry turnovers with a filling of chipped lettuce and egg. Such a consommé stimulates the appetite for the course to follow and leaves no doubt that an important dinner has begun. Thanks.